8 years old, I obviously wasn't this tall, and the microphone didn't have to be this high. When I was 8 years old, our teacher gave us an assignment. We had to write a book report about an American hero. My parents relished these sorts of assignments because it gave them an opportunity to put into my otherwise mainstream public education a bit of their cultural beliefs and their historical perspective. Now, my parents are typical, in fact, they're prototypical North Philadelphian parents, but with a twist. They met in college. That's where they fell in love. In fact, they met in college at a recruitment rally for the Black Panther Party. And they started dating after the party and fell madly in love. And several weeks after that, my father gained a bit of notoriety by climbing on top of the water tower at James State University in protest to some sort of school administration policy that he didn't think was appropriate. And my mother, she did her revolutionary domestic thing by bringing him sandwiches every day that he was up on top of the tower. Every week she would cut off the corner of the bread. Now, having said that, obviously my family is not the typical American family, but they are. And every day my father would come home and he would pull us together as a family. Now, my parents married in an African ceremony. I'm looking at my sister, she's taking my picture. My parents married in an African ceremony, and it was that attitude that they brought to the parenting of their children. We were raised as Pan-Africanists. And my sisters and I, Layla and Libya, we learned Swahili as we were growing up, and I learned to play the timbale. And before I pulled Christmas gifts out from under a Christmas tree, I was lighting candles at Kwanzaa. And my father would come home from work every day, just like any other family, and he would put his key in the lock, and the three of us would run to the door to greet him. And he would come in the door, and we'd be so excited, and he would greet us in Swahili. He would say, "Uhuru," which means freedom. And our response would be, "Sasa," which means now. And he'd say, "Uhuru, Sasa, Uhuru, Sasa, Uhuru, Sasa, freedom now." And after we met him at the door, we'd go in the house and we'd sit at the table that my mother had prepared for us, and we'd have dinner. And my father would sit at the head of the table and he would lead us in prayer. And he would thank God for the food on the table, but he'd also thank the patron saints of the Black family. He would thank Martin King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, and of course, Marvin Gaye. And after dinner, we'd retire to the living room. And my mother and I, sometimes we'd play Scrabble, or sometimes I'd play chess with my father. Or more often than not, my father would break out his old records of revolutionary recordings of like Angela Davis and Huey Newton. And we'd sit there and we'd listen to this rhetoric that I so much love. But that was my family. And we did this report, and you can imagine that growing up from these parents, my mother picked an American hero that was Black Moses, Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman, many of you probably know, is one of the most prolific conductors on the Underground Railroad. She's probably less well known for being very active and very vocal with women's suffrage. But this woman, who was born illiterate, born a slave, escaped from slavery that she'd known all her life from the eastern shore of Maryland to Philadelphia, where I grew up. So I wrote this report, and my mother would want you to know that I got an A. But more important than that A, what I took away from this assignment was that this incredible person had so much courage that at 8 years old, even then I knew I would never have, and I didn't certainly have it at that time. And that even though she couldn't read, she knew that she could read the stars and follow that to this place called the North, And that she was going to this place in pursuit of this thing called freedom, just this thing called freedom. And that when she got there, this thing that she had never experienced, that she didn't know anyone who had experienced, that she wasn't by law entitled to have, she wanted that. And in order to get that, she was willing to go in the dead of winter, in the dark of night, by starlight, travel miles for almost 3 weeks from some place that we could get to in 2 hours, and trust people as black as her who would have sold her out for a scrap of bacon, and people as white as the slave master that she was running away from. And I, as that 8-year-old child, had my first understanding of the meaning of faith. And so I wrote that report. Now, I want to tell you that that story moved me in a way that I had never been moved before. And any child that learns something new tells everybody that they know about that story. And so everyone I met, I told this story. Did you know that Harriet Tubman did a round trip between the South and the North 19 times and saved 300 slaves? Did you know that in the 8 years that she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, that she had $40,000 of bounties on her head? And did you know that she carried a gun at 5 feet tall, not to protect her from the slave catchers who were trying to collect those bounties, but to discourage the men who were twice as big as she was, who were afraid to go for this future in the North and were willing to go back to the misery of the plantations that they had known. So I wanted to pay tribute beyond just writing a report about this woman. And I didn't know what to do, so I just kept telling stories. And I kept telling this story to my best friend, Rodney. Now, he was my best friend by virtue of the fact that he lived next door to me, and neither of us could get off of our stoop. We weren't permitted to leave the stoop. So I must have told him this story 100 times. And on the 101st time, I happened to be telling him the story, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye that in the window was his cat, this big, white, fluffy cat named Snowball. And Snowball, all day long, would sit and watch our street.